Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bold Like a Leopard, and we're going to do a stream today. It was originally supposed to be with someone who wanted to request a topic, and this person, who shall remain nameless and genderless, has backed out because, I don't know, they didn't have the heart for it. And the subject of this stream is a certain guy named Irami Oze Frimpong, who is known on YouTube as the Funky Academic. Some of you may follow the channel Breaking Brown with Yvette Carnell. He used to be on that channel, and that's a channel that most of what they talk about is how if you just gave people reparations, they wouldn't be angry anymore, and they'd probably be able to adjust very well. Which it's very much a false offer. That's the way I'll define it. You have a lot of people who say that, and if you give them enough time, they pretty much show that it is disingenuous to say that, well, if you give reparations to people, they'll be fine, and then America can move on from the legacy of racism and slavery. And I say this because there's a lot of people out there who, for whatever reason, they still like to give racial arsonists as much credence as they can in order to, for whatever reason, seem like they're either with it, or they have their finger on the pulse, or they know the real voices of the community, whatever community it is. In this case, it's the Black community. And what I would say is, the more you listen to these people, the more you realize that they're just looking to gain from the violence and from, like, if this person, Oze Frimpong, was really dedicated to his cause, he would probably be in Atlanta, which is not far from where he lives, taking part in himself. And the reason that I was asked to cover this person has nothing to do with the widespread rioting and social unrest of the past couple of days, because I was asked about him sometime earlier last week before the riots and protests and burnings had started. And it was concerning a different matter, which was this issue of, what's her name, Amy Cooper, that white lady from Central Park, who had been basically, let me just send this to the person who did not join me today. I want that person to be aware that I'm fulfilling my end of the bargain to cover this, even though this person is not really, they don't think that it's worth another viewpoint, even though I was not really the person who was going to cover this. But in any case, so yeah, I just sent it to that person, who shall remain nameless, faceless, and genderless. And what I would say is, you have a lot of people who they make their careers on this constant tension between people of different races, and they will never, ever, ever try to move past it, because there's no reason to move past it. It's their life. It is their opus. What do you call it? Their magnus opus is just doing more and more damage to the idea that people can have meaningful interactions with other people regardless of their race. And this is coming from a person. So we'll get into who he is. I'll just state this: I haven't spoken to this person in either face to face or on the phone or anything. I'm talking about the Funky Academic, but I was blocked by him on Facebook, I think in 2017. And the fact is that these people will hide behind their computer screens, just as, like, people accuse me of hiding behind my computer screen. That's fine, but I don't engage in activism. I don't call for violence, and I don't tell people to do things that will probably ruin their lives. So I think that me having a channel where I analyze what other people are doing yes, we all engage in this sort of voyeuristic look at other people and their mistakes, and that's part of why YouTube is really sort of a negative. It's a negative experience. It's where people go to observe the failings of humanity, either on video or just being commented on by other people. So I don't feel like I have any reason to shrink away from just criticizing this guy as much as I can, regardless of the fact that he may claim, "Oh, I'm looking at it from a place of white privilege." Well, no, I would say that this is a guy. He is in academia. He has no accountability to anyone. He's virtually, and by the way, he could have been basically defrocked from his position for many of the ridiculous things that he says, but for the intervention of the Foundation for Individual Rights of Education, which is by and large a very good organization, and it's fine that they defended him. And they defended his academic freedom, even though this is a person who fundamentally believes that white people are, they have less standing to speak in society than he does.
America, my name is Irami Ose Frimpong. I'm at thefunkyacademic.com, and I was about to close up my desk and go to bed, and then I saw this story of Amy Cooper. Amy Cooper is a woman who's about my age who wanted to allow her dog to run free in Central Park. And it turns out that that's illegal. It's known to be illegal, but she still wanted her dog to play. And she wants what she wants, and she apparently is used to getting what she wants, but then someone was videotaping her doing so, and let me play the video.
Would you please stop? Sir, I'm asking you to stop.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to
And
me.
I'm taking a picture and calling the cops.
Please call the cops. Please call the cops.
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, I'm in the ramble, and there is a man, African-American, he has a bicycle helmet. He is recording me and threatening me and my dog. There is an African-American man, I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And my... I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the ramble. Please send the cops immediately. I'm in Central Park in the ramble. I don't know.
Thank you.
Would you please stop?
So there are a lot of interpretations about what's going on. So what you saw was her ordering a hit on this young man who was videotaping her with her unleashed dog, breaking the law. And you have to understand the casualness with which she did this. And there have been a lot of interpretations about what was going on, and a lot of them are bad. So I want to clarify, this is the definitive interpretation of what's going on. All right. So appreciate the casualness with which Amy Cooper, from now I'll just call her Karen, it's just easier, was called the police and just suggested that she was going to use the full force of the law to terrorize the person who caught her doing something that she shouldn't have done. That's a horrifying thing. But people are saying, well, obviously she was just trained and she's done this before. I don't think she has. See, this is what you don't understand about white supremacy. She didn't have to do it before. It's just she knew her role. She knew how to do that the same way that she probably knows the words to Wagon Wheel and Sweet Caroline. This is just things she knows, and she doesn't know how she knows it. She's never been tested on them, but if called, she could just recite the script. And although she knows she broke the law, because everybody knows the law in New York with regard to dogs and leashing, it didn't matter because she was a white woman and he was a black man, and laws are not for her. They're for her to criminalize him.
All right, so you saw the framing of that story, and I would say that I don't really care about Karen Cooper or whatever the fuck her name is. And I don't care about the other guy in the video. They both seem like, douchebags. And obviously he's right that if you're in that area of Central Park, you have to have a leash on your dog. However, according to Christian Cooper's own, so they're both named Cooper, the other guy, the guy she's threatening to call the police on, she was, so he apparently had an exchange with her before that provoked this ridiculous argument where they both, like, especially she ends up looking like a complete idiot, but this was his Facebook post. So he starts, Central Park this morning, this woman's dog is tearing through the plantings in the ramble. Me, ma'am, dogs in the ramble have to be on the leash at all times. The sign is right there. Her, the dog runs are closed. He needs his exercise. Me, all you have to do is take him to the other side of the drive outside the ramble and you can let him run off leash all you want. Her, it's too dangerous. Me, look, if you're going to do what you want, I'm going to do what I want, but you're not going to like it. Her, what's that? Me, to the dog, come here, puppy. Her, he won't come to you. Me, we'll see about that. I pull out the dog treats I carry for such intransigence. I didn't even get a chance to toss any treats to the pooch before Karen scrambled to grab the dog. Her, don't you touch my dog. That's when I started video recording with my iPhone, and when her inner Karen fully emerged and took a dark turn. Now, we don't have video of that in order to see how either of their tones were, but he's admitting that this wasn't something that started when he started to record. This was an argument that they'd already had, and he basically had approached her because of he's a bird watcher, and I'm assuming that if there's dogs around, there's less birds around to watch because they might get spooked by a dog running around and chasing them. So yes, this is a guy who was essentially telling her to scram or put a leash on the dog, and they had an argument, and she decided she's going to call the cops on him because she decided that he was threatening the dog. And I can understand certainly that this is a case where you have two people that are both in the wrong, and two wrongs don't make a right. But they've made it out to be, as Jose Frimpong is saying, that she was ordering a hit on this guy. And as some of the viewers are pointing out, yeah, she was choking that dog, and it was pretty ridiculous how she was freaking out. And I don't think that we have to necessarily look at her as some sort of aggrieved party just because she is, I'm assuming that she has some sort of defense mechanism when anyone approaches her in the park. Maybe it is activated by an aversion to people of other races like black people, and maybe it isn't. But we can't just go and say that because she called the police to Central Park in order to address this person who was accosting her, even if the person's accosting her for the right reasons, that doesn't mean that she's calling on the police to murder the other person. That's exactly what he's trying to say here.
Right, and this is very important. So these people who want to criminalize her and say that, like, well, she broke the law, be very, very suspicious of white women who see this video and say, like, oh, she's horrible. I'm shocked that she would do this. She should go to jail. Be very suspicious about that. That's that kind of carceral feminism that tries to distance Amy Cooper from themselves.
So this is Frimpong's own this is where you see that you can't win with people who are racial arsonists. Okay, he is a racial arsonist. There's no other way to put it. Sorry, I thought there was an ant on my mic. He's saying that even if a white woman is saying, well, I think that she's totally in the wrong, she has to be put in jail, it's not enough for him. It's almost as if you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Such that's why you never, ever, ever take the side of people in stupid arguments if you can help it. Obviously, if it's your friend or family that's you know, they got into a bar fight or something, and you have a stake in it, I don't have any advice of what to do in that case. Right? Maybe you should stop hanging out with people who get into bad situations. But that's the best advice I can tell you. But we're well past that, and this is, again, this is the function of YouTube and all of the social media companies. It's in order to highlight bad behavior and have the rest of society voyeuristically criticize it as if we're better than that. And indeed, he's using this as, you know, it's like telescoping. Not only is it important for people to condemn Amy Cooper as this paragon of white privilege and the white woman's ability to get black people killed, now you must also condemn the white people that condemn her as people who themselves are hypocrites. And I would say that it shows exactly his mentality. This is a person who thinks that if you are of a certain race, you should have no recourse. You should be basically living in guilt forever over things that other people did. And even in living in that guilt, you should be assumed to be disingenuous and facetious about it.
Because Amy Cooper is not an anomaly. She's just regular professional white entitlement. She ordered a hit on Christian. Now, remember, this guy Christian who took the video was a Harvard graduate. Doesn't matter. People who say like, "Oh, education is what matters." No, he was just, to Amy Cooper, he was just an uppity Negro, and she was doing her job as, you know, a white woman of a certain class. She has a degree from the University of Chicago, and she was just doing her job as a white woman of a certain class to live her life free, and using the long arm of the law to do it, to order a hit on them. John Crawford died, you know, because of this. And the history of you know, white women like Amy Cooper probably killed more black people than the Klan. And because they've used both the Klan and the police officer to do it. So you have to understand that white supremacy is what we call a concrete universal.
So you're hearing the message loud and clear. If you are a person who is a white woman and you are in any way in a dispute with somebody, especially of the black race, and you try to get police or any sort of assistance, you are complicit in a murder. That's basically what's happening. So what Arami or Jose Frimpong is saying, that there's no conceivable way where you can come out of this essentially morally or ethically right. So let's say a lot of these women who get let's look at an example, okay? So something that's very, very common is the sexual assault on campus. And you might remember in 2011, was it 2011? I guess it was up until 2016. There were a number of athletes at Baylor University, if you're a college football fan, who were arrested for sexual assault. And in many cases, they were, and we don't know the races of the people that they assaulted because obviously there is victim identity is preserved. But if so, what basically they're hinging their whole worldview on is this notion that if the victim, okay, pay attention to this, if the victim is a white woman and the accused is a black man, then she's basically ordering the murder of this person. But the fact of the matter is that all of the people who were accused of sexual assault in this case, whether by merit or not, okay, I don't want to say that every single case was true and that the player was in the wrong, but let's be clear. None of these people were murdered by the police. In the case so you have Tevin Elliott, a Baylor linebacker. So let's go to his page. See if we can get his mugshot. So this guy got 20 years. And he's a Baylor football player. He could have possibly been in the NFL. And instead he's doing let me see. I think I have to do this stupid survey. Okay. Former Baylor football player Tevin Elliott, who a prosecutor said needs to grow a conscience, was sentenced to the maximum 20 years in prison and a $10,000 fine Thursday on each of 2 counts of sexually assaulting a former Baylor student in 2012. A 54th State District Court jury of 9 women and 3 men deliberated about 2 hours before rejecting the 22-year-old Elliott's plea for probation. While Elliott, a former defensive end at Baylor, was convicted of sexually assaulting a Baylor freshman twice at a party at a South 3rd Street apartment complex, 2 other former Baylor students testified that he sexually assaulted them too. There also was evidence that a 4th student reported he sexually assaulted her, but she did not testify. Elliott, who came to Baylor in 2009 from Mount Pleasant, must serve at least 10 years before he can seek parole. By law, his sentences must be served concurrently. So he possibly assaulted, 4 women? And yet he's being portrayed as, in the universe of Aramio Oze Frimpong, if his accuser was a black woman, then I guess it's fair game. If his accuser was a white woman, then she was ordering his murder. That's the way the logic works in the minds of people who are racial arsonists. They don't care whether somebody has been used as some sort of plaything by some sort of offender. The only thing they care is whether the offender is of one race or the other. And that's why you see these people who only care about social justice. They don't care about the justice that is entailed in very specific circumstances. They think that on a societal level, you have to solve inequality, but you can't just, if somebody has raped you or sexually assaulted you or assaulted your family or something, then it really just depends what identity they are. That doesn't, everything else doesn't matter. What actually happens does not actually matter. So that's what I would say is the attitude of someone like, and you can see that. This is their attitude. They have this attitude. People like Oze Frimpong, the funky academic, they have this attitude that it's more significant that some idiot in the park called the police on someone who had, I guess, gotten into an argument with her over a dog than they are about, let's see here, it's too much spam messaging, by the way. But in any case, they could care less if someone is being sexually assaulted in college while possibly intoxicated at a party. Okay, and I'm not saying that the person is automatically guilty. I would hope that this guy Tevin Elliott was actually guilty and that there was evidence against him, rather than try to just convict him based on this notion that he's a jock, he's a star athlete, and these women, there's so many women against him. Because like I've said before, what should really matter is the evidence. What should really matter is the credibility of the accuser, whether there's corroboration, and whether there is guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Not whether one person is of a certain background and the other person is of another. Right? Elliott said he disagrees with the jury's verdict and continued to claim that all three of the women who did not know each other when the assaults occurred lied. Still, he apologized to them, not because he admitted assaulting them, but because he said they are mad at him. I apologize, but I'm not the bad person they think I am. He said, I am a great person. I'm just going to grow and stay focused on my kids and work and teach my kids to learn from my mistakes and help them grow up to be better men. In punishment testimony, prosecutors Hilary Laborde and Robert Moody called three of the women who reported Elliott sexually assaulted them and their mothers to give the jury an idea of the horrific effects. So yada, yada, yada. And these were sexual assaults that were covered up by Baylor University for a while. You know, Art Briles, I believe, had some sort of... Art Briles was the head coach at Baylor. I believe he was Robert Griffin III's head coach. And, you know, nothing to do with him. He's actually been a model citizen. Never been accused of anything untoward. So it's very ironic, in my opinion, that you have a guy, you know, Elliott was, I guess, I think he was a linebacker or something. And I don't think that when you have the star of the University of Baylor University, who's a very visible black guy, I believe he was even the Heisman Trophy winner of his year, and he was not accused of sexual assault because he didn't do anything, right? And he could have. I mean, there are false accusations against people. But yet this guy was accused of sexual assault. It was covered up. And he was, he was eventually convicted. So there was another guy, Sam Ukwachu, whose conviction was reversed, right? And apparently he assaulted some other people. But my main message here is that you do have this issue where people can't decide what's more important, the rights of the victims or the rights of certain identity groups. That's really the problem here. And in the mind of somebody like Aremi Ose Frimpong, whether somebody committed an offense is largely irrelevant. It's all about which social inequality has to be addressed here, whether it's misogyny or whether it's racism. And in his pyramid of grievances, the racism trumps the misogyny, right? So therefore, if somebody is, if somebody has this urge to call the police on someone else, it's not whether there's an actual palpable threat. It's all dependent on whether that person is aware that they could lead to the person that they're calling the police on getting killed. That's what's important to him, even though obviously people call the police on other people all the time. People call the police due to noise nuisance. They call the police due to neighbor disputes over such as things like where they build their fence, over over seeing someone drunk driving on the highway. It's the way, like, I personally, I don't think I've ever called the police on anyone, simply because I generally try to stay out of other people's business. And that's really what we're talking about here.
A concrete universal is a universal that determines its own particular forms. All right, so it genders itself. And actually, white supremacy in a man looks different than white supremacy in a woman. A man wouldn't have been able to do that phone call. It would have, like, that interaction would have gone differently with a male white supremacist. All right? So you have to understand that there's a peculiar power that comes from womanhood that's targeted at black men. And this is important to understand because a lot of people don't understand patriarchy. I'll be honest, a lot of people just don't understand patriarchy. They think it's patriarchy is men versus women, when really patriarchy is a subset of men against primarily other outgroup men.
So well, what's that supposed to mean? I think what he probably means is that it's men against men who think that they're women, or men against the men who are of a different race, or men against men who like films, or men against men who are, it's on and on and on, and it's really ridiculous. What he's complaining about is social hierarchy, and it is something that has existed in every society since the beginning of time. If you went to China at any point, but if you went to China, especially, like, did you think Marco Polo showed up in the court of the great Khan, Kublai Khan, and he's like showing up and he's like, hey, who I got to speak to get a cannoli over here? And somebody over there was like, I don't know, there's nobody in charge here, right? We're just some sort of blob of people. We just exist, right? No, that's not the way it was. Obviously, there was somebody in charge that took him to see the Great Khan.
With it's really a subset of men versus everybody, with the most violence reserved for outgroup men. And this is why patriarchal violence will often look like the Klan. It'll often look like mass incarceration. It'll often look like, honestly, it'll look like Amy Cooper being comfortable sicking the state as an institution against this black man. And if you want to know more about this, Jim Sedanis and Felicia Pareto, Sedanis is a sociologist over at Harvard, wrote a great book called Social Dominance. And it just says that, like, look, we misunderstand patriarchy. Patriarchy is a subset of men against everybody else, with the help of in-group women who gain a lot of benefits from being in-group women. All
right, guys, let's rewind that. If you want to understand the way that patriarchy oppresses society, you have to read a book by two academics that probably never sold out its first edition. And then you will understand why it doesn't matter who you are. It's wrong to go to the park and call the police if someone else is in an argument with you. That's the way to learn the proper interaction of people in society, instead of living through your own hatred and desire for other people to be killed. That's the lesson. Okay?
So Amy Cooper now has the ability, through the patriarchal system, to sick cops on someone who is particularly vulnerable because of patriarchy, being an outgroup man, being the target of patriarchy. So Amy Cooper is a patriarch, is what we have to understand. So when you're trying to break down patriarchy in the United States, you're actually trying to break down Amy Cooper's power. And when you're trying to break down patriarchy in the United States, you're trying to actually break down Christian, the videographer's, vulnerability, which is, I think, the right fight. But if you think that patriarchy...
Did he get killed in that incident? I seem to have missed something. I believe he's still alive. Okay, so evidently it's not as simple as calling the police while you're in Central Park to order a murder in New York City. Otherwise, it would be very simple. You would just wait till your target is in Central Park. You call the police on them, right? If they're not a black person, maybe you throw some, you coat them in Ovaltine or something. I don't know. And you make them look black. And that's how you do it, apparently. That's what he thinks. But it didn't work this time. It's almost as if this fiendish plot has some sort of flaw in it.
It's men versus women. You're just confused. You're actually probably just a white supremacist. Because it's always been one subset of group of men versus everybody, with the help of in-group women. They might be paternal toward the in-group women, condescending, but not using institutionalized violence like this was. Right? Patriarchy isn't when you call the cops on your wife. That's a breakdown of patriarchy, actually, but that's fodder for a different video. So what we're seeing right now is Amy Cooper just being normal white woman, and Christian, the videographer, being normal black man in his regular space of vulnerability. So if you make Cooper out to be some sort of crazy aberration, you don't understand the standing vulnerability that Christian the videographer lives in. Like, that's the vulnerability of black manhood in the United States. And that's the point I want to get across. So how do you disable that? You have to go after families. You have to go after the white family. Look, Moynihan wrote a report on the Negro family in the 70s, and people are still mouthing the talking point. And the cultural degradation and depravity that is consistent with white America is reproduced through the family. We have to look at how many times they learn to lie to protect their mother's feelings and learn to lie in church to protect whoever's feelings, and then just expect everybody else to lie to them in order to protect their feelings and their vulnerability. It's not like we talk about white fragility being an issue of like people being anxious about race, but white fragility is actually violent because when they're like Amy Cooper, when they break, we get shrapnel. Like that fragility.
I don't believe anybody got shrapnel in this case because, as I've stated several times, so he didn't get arrested, he didn't get shot, and she lost her job and got run out of basically every social circle that she was in. This is what's so ridiculous, that you have two idiots arguing in the park about a dog and a leash, and one of them is portrayed as a massive victim who narrowly avoided death, and the other person's portrayed as the judge, jury, and willing executioner. So I would want to ask, I don't know if there's people watching. I have a much smaller channel than the Funky Academic. But my question is this: would it have been more, I guess, acceptable ethically for you if Amy Cooper, instead of calling the police, had allowed the situation to escalate and then reached into her purse, pulled out a revolver, and shot him in the face? Because that would have disrupted this whole pattern of patriarchy that they're talking about. What the Funky Academic is talking about is that white women, they are a part of the patriarchy. It's just that they use the white man as an instrument in order to perform the parts of it that they don't feel comfortable doing. Like, they're trying to say that the woman will not do the actual dirty work of murdering a person based on racial animus. So they will provoke that. They will call the police. They will call their husband or male relative and have them perform it. So in this event, he's basically saying that the real offense is that she is performing what he considers her role in this racial hierarchy. But if she would have just skipped all those steps and actually shot him, do you think that he would have judged her the same way or differently? I would say he would probably have judged her just as harshly, if not worse.
Is actually the...
Put your opinion in the comments. Which one do you think is worse in his mind? She's calling the cops on him, or she actually shoots him after the argument really gets out of hand?
The trigger for violence, right? So we've organized the United States to live in... there's a great video, there's a great picture I often use about... let me see if I can find it. We've organized the United States. There it is. Oh, I found it. We've organized the United States such that it's kind of organized for the protection of white women. And you say that, you say, why do you say that? I mean, well, look at this video. I didn't make up this graphic. Now, if I just put this graphic in front of you and I said, we are the most carceral nation in the world, most carceral modern nation in the United States, one of the most carceral nations in the United States. Could it be the case that either one, we've somehow taken all of the risk and potential criminality out of white females' lives and lumped it onto African-American lives, or African-American males just like awful beasts? Or maybe this is all the system is designed to decriminalize white women for the sake of criminalizing black men. That's what this graph says to me. So think very carefully about how it's almost impossible. You have to do cocaine off of a policeman's badge on video if you're a white woman to go to jail. Like, if you're a white woman, you did it. Like that's what that graph says. You just did it. So how have we decriminalized white female life? And I think it's for the sake of criminalizing black.
So Nick's Radio is asking in the chat whether Christian Cooper actually got arrested. Every report I've seen says that there's no mention of him being arrested. So that's all I know. If there's a report out there that he was arrested as part of this incident, you can send it to me. I'll admit that I was wrong. But even if he was arrested, you have to remember that what Aremi Oze Frimpong is saying is that it's a death sentence. So apparently, as of right now, we know that I'm assuming he was not arrested because every single account that I'm seeing has, first of all, there was no crime underlying, except what was later discovered was certain things that he said that may have been, could be construed as a threat that nobody captured at the time. So, these are things that he said on his Facebook page that I read earlier from this Law and Crime blog over here. So, yes, I would say that this is just a canard. It's largely just people venting about it. And like I said at the beginning of this stream, when some of you might have not been here, there was someone who asked me to cover this, and they decided apparently that it's not in vogue enough anymore, so they pulled out of it. And I decided to cover it because I think it is interesting enough to see. This is a guy who, by the way, I think some of you might have watched I think it was an upload that I did about Sagar and Jetty and what's her name, Crystal Ball. This is a guy who they have on their show all the time as some sort of expert on stuff. He's not an expert. He's an expert on being an asshole. That's what I can tell you. And that's what I'm trying to tell you, that racial arsonists will always try to portray themselves as the people who can read between the lines of what's happening and show you crimes that are occurring that have nothing to do with the circumstances. Amy Cooper's crime has nothing to do with whether she was in the right in this interaction with this other guy, Christian Cooper. Obviously, we can all admit that she should have had her dog on the leash according to the park ordinances. And obviously, we can now see that he hadn't started that interaction from the time that he pressed record on his phone. But that doesn't mean that she was ordering a hit on him when she called the police, because if that were true, he would probably be either dead or injured now. And as of this recording, what I'm doing now, as of this stream, there's no evidence that he was even arrested, let alone any of those other things.
Black male life. And that's been the entire strategy. There was other, anyway. So you have to think about how do you kind of dismember white supremacy in the United States? You have to go after the family. You have to think about, how is this reproduced? How is this normalized? What if Amy Cooper is just regular white woman who feels comfortable lying on anybody when she is like something doesn't go her way, especially of a certain class? Remember, she has a University of Chicago degree. She's probably never gotten a B. She was rewarded. She was taught that these are the entitlements of her life. I would bet all of my money that there was a photo somewhere with Amy Cooper with a pussy hat on, being a victim, because as a woman, she's a victim. She's, she hit that glass ceiling. She's a VP. She should be president. And we just have to be honest about how part of how racism works in America and operates in America is by using an overwhelming gender. And being a black male in America is to be terrified of the institutional power that white women wield. And white women have been sicking authorities on black men in America for as long or longer than there has been in America. There's a great book on this by Stephanie Rogers called They Were Her Property, about, the awfulness of white women. And not only that, not only the awfulness of white women, they're penchant to lie about it. They're penchant to lie. And when they lie to themselves about themselves, they end up lying to everybody else about everybody else and themselves. So it's a fascinating book. So don't criminalize Amy Cooper. Understand that, one, this isn't about a dog. There's a lot of people who are talking about this, about what happened to that dog? She almost strangled the dog. No, this is about one brave Negro who put it on the line to expose how vulnerable our situation is.
So let's understand that. A, white women are awful according to him, and B, this guy is a hero because he got into an argument with some other retard in the park. Both of these people are, by the way, they're upper middle class New Yorkers in the park, and they just, one of them couldn't stay out of the other person's business, and now it's national news, and one of them has lost their job. Happens to be that the person who lost their job was the white woman, and the person who is now portrayed as this hero and almost martyr is the other guy, Christian Cooper. That's the way it works. When in reality, if you're really, really, really looking at the situation as a person who can evaluate the world as something that's inhabited by imperfect beings, you see two morons, two idiots in the park. One of them who calls the police because someone's talking to their dog, and the other one who strikes up a conversation with someone to bother them about their stupid dog, right? That if you're in the park and you see other people minding their own business, just shut the fuck up and move along. Who cares? We have, I live a few blocks away from a park, and there's all these skateboarders that go there all the time and they grind on the railings and stuff like that. Nobody gives a shit because most people are, I would say, disinterested in getting into other people's business. But that's not the way that both racial arsonists and Karens are. What Arami Oze Frimpong is not getting into is the fact that people like him are the mirror image of the Karen, because while the Karen is a person who will scrutinize other people's actions to see if they're following the rules, the racial arsonist they'll make up rules in order to see if other people are holding up their vision of the way the world should be.
So don't make this about a dog. Make this about how we've, as a feature of America, churn out awful white women into white supremacy. As a feature, not a bug, a feature. Don't treat her as a bug. And don't let all these feminists or whoever try to treat Amy Cooper as a bug, as some sort of aberrant. No. She is normal, and we as a black, and I say this as a black man, am taught to fear her as normal because she is normal. Now, making these kind of...
Now remember, he's saying that he's been taught to fear the white woman even though she's portrayed as normal. Let's rewind that. I don't want to mischaracterize his words.
Amy Cooper as a bug, as some sort of aberrant. No. She is normal, and we as a black, and I say this as a black man, am taught to fear her as normal because she is normal. Now, making these kind of videos make me down white unemployable. So if you appreciate anything that I've said, or if you've learned anything about anything over the last, 15 minutes or so, go ahead and go to funkyacademic.com and, kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month, because I'm trying to give a quality of education and interpretation that you're not going to get anywhere else. And remember, don't criminalize Amy Cooper. We're going to have to investigate, do an autopsy. We need to look into every formative institution, every school, every church, every family, and figure out how she thrived being so awful. And that's when we're serious about actually deconstructing white supremacy. And it's going to take like...
You hear that, everybody? We're going to have to audit every single white church or whatever, all that other crap, down to the family unit in order to fit, because some two morons in the park got into an argument. That's the message here.
Moynihan report on the white family. Moynihan report on the white labor market. Moynihan report on how we've distorted women in gender studies such that we only understand women as victims when they are clearly, the history of America is a history of white women being perpetrators of violence onto outgroup males, especially black males. So how have we mischaracterized that? Like, it's not just that we forget that Gloria Steinem worked for the CIA, although we do. But we just have to look at how feminism and women's advocacy is used as a driver of incarceration, as a driver of school segregation. And the prerogatives that we've kind of lumped into gender advocacy, now we can do things to black men that we can't do because they're black, but we can do because they're black men. And you especially can do it if you're a woman, right? And that is a problem if you, like me, actually care about justice, right? And I don't like living under this kind of vulnerability. And you have to understand.
So he's saying, I want to live in justice, and I don't like living under this vulnerability and whatever. And you have people, I don't know if these are people who are trolling, but Bill Cosby's innocent and what. This is how ridiculous it is. There might be people in the chat, on his chat, that think Bill Cosby is ridiculous, even though most of the women, to my knowledge, that accused Bill Cosby were black.
And why, I don't know, it's just the case. So if you like what I do, go ahead and send this video around. This is the interpretation of the Karen video that you should send to all your friends and post on your social media wall. We need to go after the families. We need to go after the churches. We need to go after all of the water that reproduces this kind of entitlement. And we need to understand this as a gendered entitlement. A guy couldn't have done that. A guy wouldn't have done this. A guy wouldn't have ginned up tears and called the cops in New York.
Yeah. Men don't call the police at all. Ever.
Not a liberal guy, right? So, like, you have to understand, this is what the fear of racial terrorism looks like for black men. It's gendered, and we're vulnerable to women who stand on womanhood to do this. All right? So if we want justice, we have to attack gender this way.
All right. So given that, I want people to understand that, this guy is actually married to, now he took this down apparently, but he's married to a white woman, his wife. And, I tried to find a place but she works here, and this is his wife. And she says, she's whiter than me in every possible way. And she's a minister or something. And she's talking about Bayard Rustin and all that. So so if he's so afraid of white women and what they could do and how they could potentially endanger his life by calling the cops at the slightest disagreement, like, for example, some dog in the park. How does he not live his life every single moment in fear of what his own wife would do if, God forbid, he was to displease her in every way? This is why you have to look at these racial arsonists and understand that they're empty people. They don't actually have real beliefs and principles. They're simply people who are power hungry, vacuous would-be tyrants. They want power over other people because they themselves have wallowed in their own powerlessness for many years. And their powerlessness isn't from some sort of injustice. It's just that they've made a lot of turns in their life where they were told that things are supposed to be better, and yet they, for whatever reason, they don't end up getting that trophy for being on the baseball team because their team didn't win, or they didn't win the science fair, or they got into a mediocre university. Now, Jose Frimpong, I'm actually pressed for time because I have to go do something, but this is a guy who is talking all the time about how the white people are the problem, and especially the white women, and I think this is one of the reasons that he no longer is on the show with Yvette Carnell, because he's just a racial arsonist. That's the way it is. He wants there to be violence. Georgia TA asked if he'll rule out violence. His answer, no. And let's see if we can get that video.
Okay, we're going to want to close that door too, so. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Sorry, I muted myself earlier. Okay, the radio host, Tim Bryant, asked Irami Jose Frimpong to respond to UGA's recent statement that the university has been vigorously exploring all available legal options. Racism has no place on our campus, and we condemn the advocacy or suggestion of violence in any form. We are seeking guidance from the Office of the Attorney General as to what actions we can legally consider in accordance with the First Amendment. UGA's statement came days after Jose Frimpong posted on social media in a since deleted tweet that some white people may have to die for black communities to be made whole in this struggle to advance to freedom, and that fighting white people is a skill. Speaking with Bryant, Jose Frimpong called the issue of violence on campus a, quote, little bit dubious, citing the existence of UGA's ROTC program. The TA went on to say that he did, quote, not advocate for violence, adding that he was just honest about the history of racial progress in the United States. Are you advocating for nonviolence? Bryant then asked Jose Frimpong. The TA responded with, yeah, insofar, okay, so what we have to understand about nonviolence. So then the guy catches him. He says, that's a yes or no. Why does that need a caveat? Do you advocate for nonviolence? Again, Jose Frimpong did not offer a definitive answer. Insofar that it's a transformative process, that depends on the shaming of oppressors. So you're not ruling out violence, Bryant asked. No, the TA responded. Against who? Violence against who? Bryant asked. Whoever the oppressors may be, Jose Frimpong said, adding that violence is always a second best option because it doesn't have the same kind of transformative power that nonviolence has. But it's just an open question. Have we made a white culture that is able to be shamed? Because I suspect the people at those public lynchings would not be talked out of if I was about to be lynched, of lynching me. As you said before on my drive over here, mobs are kind of immune to facts. So there is a way in which we have to create a populace that is actually, so the campers reform used the wrong word for populace, so maybe they need a little return to the university. We have to create a populace that is actually responsive to the truth, and then they can be shamed, and then nonviolence is appropriate, Jose Frimpong added. The University of Georgia TA also noted that it is just a fact of history that racial justice often comes at the cost of white life. Only that. Only the loss of white people's lives will, I get. That's according to him. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I have for now. I was planning, you know what, I'll go through some of these people. So the fact of the matter is we do have people like Gary Dotson who are white people who apparently it's not enough for, so here we go. Gary Dotson apparently was not white enough to not be wrongfully convicted of murder, of rape. So this guy was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and rape. He was sentenced to not less than 25 years and not more than 50 years. And it was not true. In March 1985, the victim recanted her testimony. She said she had fabricated the rape to hide a legitimate sexual encounter with her boyfriend. Dotson contended that the victim's recantation of testimony constituted grounds to vacate the original sentence. At the hearing on Dotson's motion for a new trial, the trial judge refused to order a new trial. So this is a guy, you can see he basically looks like he works at, I don't know, some gas station on the highway, on I-71 here. And he got thrown in prison for a rape that he didn't commit, that apparently never happened. This guy was... So this guy, convicted for murder, and it turns out that he wasn't even... that he'd actually just gotten a ride from the actual murderer who ratted him out. So... But you can see here, this is obviously a big Nubian king, right? So, justice only affects disproportionately, adversely one race, apparently, according to people like Aremi Jose Frempong. Now, what they will probably say is, I only think, of course there's still class differences within white hierarchy. That doesn't matter. The idea that you're going to say that white women have this special button on their phone where they can call the police and order the murder of a black person, and then you try to say that, earlier you said, well, this ability of white women to call the police on their husbands, that's just a different aspect of patriarchy, even though it's sort of a breakdown of patriarchy. He twists himself in knots. And it's just an incoherent mashup of all sorts of excuses as to why people get into ridiculous arguments, and he tries to fit them into his academic philosophy. And this is the type of person who gets considered as a legitimate commentator on public affairs by who? By The Hill with Sagar, and The Hill's Rising with Sagar and Crystal and Sagar, whatever. That's the type of universe they live in. They think that populism is people like that, as if you think that the type of conversation that you hear over on this channel, on Aremi's channel, is normal. That you think that it's normal to say that, it's necessary for blood to be shed of white people, mind you, in order for racial justice to be achieved. That's the way these people think, and that's the type of world that they live in. And that's my response. And the person who wanted me to cover this, it would have been interesting to hear their answer to what I'm talking about. No, I think that when you have people who are observing different incidents of mundane activity and they try to extrapolate that and make it seem like society as a whole is sick because of it, that's why you get outbreaks of unrest. That's why you get this racialization of society. That's why you get people who are incapable of coexisting with their neighbors, because you have this idiocy being spewed into people's minds. And I think it's unfortunate that this guy gets as much credence as he does. I don't think he's verified on Twitter, but he has a decent following, and he's been tweeting the past few days, condemning the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottom. But by the way, they basically trashed downtown Atlanta. So this is after this video came out. There was, of course, the George Floyd killing, which I would say is a murder. And he's basically trying to use this as some sort of launch pad for a larger racial unrest. But you don't see him there. You don't see him going to Atlanta and committing acts of arson and actually endangering himself, because he's part of the class of people who are academic agitators. They're not actual. This is what Howard Zinn would do. He would tell people to perform acts of civil disobedience and then go away when the actual cops came and arrested everyone, because that's not his role. It's not his role to risk himself in order to achieve the goals that he wants for the rest of society. He has other stooges in order to do that. That's the way that they think. That's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on all of these other platforms. You can see them over here, and keep an eye out for more writings. I just had another piece published in American Greatness concerning Ann Coulter, and another one for the J.ca, actually about Joe Biden and his Middle East policy. So that's about it. Enjoy the music, and I'll talk to you later.